Hello and welcome to Hosting HR with me, Leon Morley, founder of HR Recruitment Solutions. We're currently live across YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and also on Twitter at the moment. And today we're going to be discussing how to build a high-performing team. If you'd like to get involved in the show, then that would be great. We'd certainly like to hear any questions that you might have for our wonderful panel, which we'll introduce to shortly. And any comments as well. If you have an opinion about something, it's great to see those, and we will share those as well with a wider audience. So please do get involved. Also on those platforms, it would be great if you could like things. So thumbs up, or I think it's a heart on Twitter, would be very grateful for that. And obviously we let other people know that this is hopefully good quality content, which is what we're all aiming to do now. So let's do some introductions, shall we? So we'll start with Lisa. Could you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Leon. And thanks for having me here tonight. So my name's Lisa Tomlinson. I am the CEO of Limelite People Group Ltd, a HR consultancy which is values-based. And we specialise in leadership and management development in HR projects and HR consultancy support. My background is head of HR in a charity and education setting. And before that, I've had many other roles, which I think really helped to shape that experience, which I now bring to other businesses.
Thank you, Lisa. And obviously your company and HR Recruitment Solutions share the same birth date, which I'm always very happy about, or launch date, I probably should say. But yeah, nice to celebrate those birthdays together.
No, absolutely, yeah. Launching on the same day on LinkedIn was fabulous, and we've been helping each other on our journey since then, haven't we? Occasionally in a jacuzzi, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah, has been known. Right, moving on. So Liz, if you could introduce yourself to the audience, please.
Thank you, Leon. It's great to be with you all. I'm a management consultant and executive coach, and I was just thinking this morning, in December, I'll have had my practice for 35 years. And I know, long.
Congratulations, Liz.
I'm also a frequent contributor to the Harvard Business Review and to Forbes. And I come to this from more of a business perspective, I think, how to get things done on behalf of the business as a whole.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. Francisco, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi there. Thank you, Leon, for inviting me to be here with this wonderful panel. Delighted to be here. I'm the co-founder of Kodo People. Kodo People is a behavioral economics company. It's a SaaS, operating in the talent and HR space, based on, or using behavioral economics methods is pretty innovative. And I'm so happy to bring to the table a different perspective, about the topic that we have today.
Fab. And I think it makes sense to talk a little bit about behavioral economics now, because it's something that I've read a few books about in the past and found it very interesting, but it's not necessarily a widely known sort of practice or theory or school of thought. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit what we mean when we're talking about behavioral economics.
Yeah. I think behavioral economics lately is becoming trending. There are a lot of books out there. The last Nobel Prize, Richard Thaler in behavioral economics. Behavioral economics is a science that I love because it studies human behavior and take insights from other sciences like sociology, neuroscience, anthropology, psychology. Why not? Psychophysiology, neuroeconomics. And then, we know, thanks to behavioral economics and other sciences, that the Homo economicus is dead, right? It's not alive anymore because we are not fully rational. Actually, our rationality is limited, right? And because we have emotions out there, in an unconscious level, sometimes unconscious level, other times, influences our decisions, is good to consider that we are not making decisions wholly with our rationality, right? And then, I think is the main thing. Obviously, is a super wide science. You can dive in, and then you can find many things. In our case, we studied in Code of People. We applied how people make choices with real consequences, using economic games, applying the game theory as a part of behavioral economics. But you can read a lot. Now there are a lot of books. Nudging by Nudge, in this case by Richard Toller and Kat Sustein. Irrationally Predictable by Dan Ariely. Think Fast, Think Slow by Daniel Kahneman. There are a lot of books that are pretty interesting to read.
Fantastic, and I certainly think bringing that sort of different perspective into the HR arena is really interesting, and I don't know many other people that are doing it, so it seems like you're the pioneer in the space. So it's certainly great to have you on board with a completely different angle, probably to any other panelists we've had on hosting HR. So it's great to have you here. Right,
Thank
so
you.
Let's move on, shall we?
It's time for 2 Lies, 1 Truth.
Right, so it is time for 2 Lies, 1 Truth. So for those of you that might be joining us for the first time, this is where each of our panelists tell us 3 facts about themselves, 2 of which are lies and 1 is the truth. And at the end of the show, we will do a reveal. We'll all guess as well. And I think if you've been watching a few of the recent shows, I've had a very good track record of getting these right in recent times. So keen to see whether Francisco, Lisa, and Liz are able to pull the wool over my eyes on this one. So should we go in the same order? So Lisa, can you tell us your 3 facts, please?
Okay, so fact number 1. I travelled on my own to South Africa when I was 19 and had a job making didgeridoos in a backpackers hostel. Fact number 2. I beat Findus pancakes to a HR award. Fact number 3. I have a degree in fashion design.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Sorry, what's the second one? You beat who to HR award?
Findus pancakes.
Findus pancake? I don't even know what that is. I might be sure. But they make pancakes, I assume.
They're from the 80s. Everybody knows. Like Spam and Smash.
Okay.
Like Findus pancakes is in that genre.
Oh, okay. I must be too young for that, Lisa.
You must
be
too
what
young.
That is.
I show my age.
Thanks. Right, I've written those down. I'll ask you to remind us later anyway, but very interesting. Liz, will you tell us your 3 facts, please?
I decided you would find me out right away because I have a transparent face. So I'm going to read all 3 of mine and try to throw you off the scent. The first one is that I was actually trained as a concert pianist. Second is that when I was 23, I managed a 300-employee call center. And the third is that I'm an excellent cook. And one of my hobbies is hosting elaborate dinner parties.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay. I have some ideas on that. Francisco, what are your 3 facts?
Yeah, this is so difficult. I'm like Liz, right? I'm super transparent, and I'm gonna try to read and not to laugh, right? The first one is I love having for breakfast chocolate special K cereals with pineapple juice instead of milk. The second one, I worked as a stripper during my university stage. And the third one, I'm a big fan of Harry Potter.
Okay. Lots of people are big fans of Harry Potter, so we'll see on that one. We'll come back to that at the end of the show, and we'll do obviously our reveal. So yeah, there we go. We've met our 3 panelists now. We know what they do professionally, and we've got some ideas about some of the things they might do unprofessionally as well. So let's talk about how to build a high-performing team, shall we? So the first thing I sort of thought about when I was thinking about this show was how on earth do you even define what a high-performing team is? I was thinking in sport, it's pretty simple. I mean, I'm a Newcastle United fan. We're obviously a high-performing team, but it's difficult in the workplace. So I was hoping you guys as experts would be able to help me. So I'm wondering, Lisa, will you be able to perhaps define what we mean when we're talking about a high-performing team and what that generally would look like in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's an academic answer here, which is that there is many different definitions for high-performing teams, and it depends who you look at. There's clear definitions from the CIPD, the OECD, lots of academic researchers in this area. There is some things that all of those definitions have in common, though, and I think the overview for me of a high performing team is it's got to be contextual. It's got to be in the context of, you know, what that performance looks like and the specific circumstances. But there is commonalities across sports teams, Formula One teams when they're changing the tyres on the cars and trying to do the fastest job that they can, rowing teams, football teams, and those commonalities usually are around involvement of people. So everybody being involved. Everybody understanding what their role is and having ownership of that and mastering that, clear purpose, aligned goals. So there's lots of common traits that you can find when you start exploring high performance across, you know, many different teams. What do you think, Liz?
I agree with everything you've said, and I think the contextual issue is really significant. What is the team tasked with? What are their expectations? But to your point, it's really that everybody understand the same things, what the purpose is, what success looks like, the idea of supporting each other. The issue of psychological safety can be very important, particularly in typical workplaces. Sometimes that's not always the case in sports teams, but in workplaces in a classic hierarchy, psychological safety makes a real difference in the long-term capability of the team to perform. And beyond that, the issue of commitment is very significant, and whether people feel really a part of it and support each other and want to be doing what they're doing.
Yeah, you know, I absolutely agree with that. When I work with leadership teams on this, we usually have some look at Lencioni's model of a high-performing team with trust as the absolute foundation, you know, that all high-performing teams are built on, I'd say. And psychological safety is absolutely an element there. The second part of Lencioni's model, which I think is one of the other, when I work with teams, it's one of the other things that can probably make or break a team, is that threshold for challenge and conflict and constructive challenge versus destructive challenge.
Yeah, we certainly want to talk about that, because I know, Liz, that's an area for you that is something you've spent a lot of time sort of researching, conflict, and is it constructive or not, and how do you sort of manage those sorts of areas. So Francisco, it'd be good to bring you on a little bit in terms of some of the sort of behaviors that you might expect to see within a high performing team. And it's interesting to talk about psychological safety as well, because I think about some of the successful sports teams, and I'm not sure necessarily if you asked, for example, some of the footballers who used to play for Man United under Alex Ferguson, which was an incredibly successful sports team, whether they felt psychologically safe. I don't think they probably did. I think they were fearing for their lives most of the time. So, and sometimes that can bring out a high performing team, right? But just on the sort of behaviours side, Francisco, what sort of behaviours would we expect to see within a high performing team?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to put an example. For me, an orchestra is a good example of a high-performing team, because everybody is accepting their role and then they are playing their instrument. You know, it sounds great collectively, right? It's a great example, right? For me, we typically used to use sports, but in sports there is something different, because even when it's not psychologically safe place, you have some mechanisms of control, right? If you don't play well, you are in the bank, right? You are out, right? And then that is a control in the workplace. When something is not doing what is expected, what is the mechanism for control? Taking control not as a micromanagement, right? Is a huge difference. For me, behaviors, through the research that we did in the past, for instance, with Nokia Communications some years ago, and also, researching and observing many huge companies, big companies like Apple, for instance, or companies like that. I think for me, cooperation is absolutely key, your preference for cooperativeness. Trust and trustworthiness are key factors to also to build psychologically safe spaces. And long-run orientation, meaning that we have to have a common vision in the long term. We have to be patient, to coordinate, to accept others, to work together, but we have to be focused on the short term executing, right? But long-run orientation, we know by the science that is a big factor of career success. Patient people tend to be more successful than people that are impatient.
Interesting. I was thinking in recruitment, we always talk about impatience
Always running,
being
always
something
running.
that makes somebody like really successful. I'm notoriously impatient, and I've had made a good career obviously in what we're doing, but it's very much on the basis of I want things to happen now. I want to get that candidate now. I want the role on now.
Yeah,
it's the patience side of things. But in fairness, when I think about obviously HR recruitment, you think about the long term and the long run. You're not thinking about necessarily the next week, and you want to build the right brand and the right company with the right people in it and doing the right things, or what I perceive all those things to be anyway. So I was interested in just thinking about, because this is obviously aimed at HR professionals, right? So is it the HR professions, and probably Lisa is probably the HR representative on this panel, is it HR's responsibility to create and build high performing teams, or is it managers, or is it a collective effort, or who do you think should be really thinking about how we're going to do that and how we're going to build these teams? Do you think HR should be the main sort of people looking at this?
I mean, it's a collective effort, right? Because, HR can't be tasked with something as important as making whatever team that looks like, whether it's, a small team over a business unit, or whether it's a executive leadership team. That's too important a job to put on one department. And, we talked about within high performing teams, it's really important to have a clear leader often, and clear responsibilities and clear job roles, and for people to understand those. So it's got to be a collective effort to create that. It can't sit with an outside function necessarily. However, HR have got some really important things to do there. In organisational design and development, how do they shape this organisation? How do they link that to the strategic goals? How do they make sure that those strategic goals are communicated? Again, not just HR, but how do they make sure that silos don't develop and people aren't starting to go after their own goals, rather than those aligned goals? Job design, another really important thing. One thing that I always focus on in terms of high performing teams as well is diversity, because you don't get high performing team if you have a homogenous group.
Right.
If you think back to that, I don't know if anyone saw the photo of the EU summit where they were talking about Ukraine, and it was just a sea of, white-haired men of a certain age, and there was no difference, in this table of 150 people. Those type of groups don't lead to high-performing teams generally, because there's often, really similar blind spots, and they're not bringing that, that creativity, that innovation, that difference of thought. Even when we do, DISC profiles or whatever other psychometric profile you do, you're trying to get people from each different characteristic to build a really good team. So HR do have a real role to play in terms of the recruitment, selection, the job design, the organisational design, to create the environment that's psychologically safe where those teams can thrive.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I think that's all great. And I also think that sometimes HR is unfairly looked to fix a team, to cause it to be high performing when it's not high performing, when that really requires magic. HR can be incredibly helpful in all the things you talked about, Lisa, and also in, depending on what the circumstances are, of course, looking for the right competencies. And making sure not just that people know their roles, but actually have the skills to do them. They can do the wonderful investigation up front to determine what's necessary if they are given a seat at the table in the business. or can advocate for that seat. But it's remarkable how often HR is brought in sort of at the 11th hour when things aren't working. And that's painful for everybody because it's hard to save the day then. If HR can be an internal facilitator, that's often very helpful, or acting as a consultant to help structure things. But I would hate to have all the pressure put there. I don't think it's fair.
Interesting. When we're talking about, we talked about OD there, Lisa, and we're talking about culture. And I always think, well, yeah, that's probably got to be a key part of it, right? So everyone knows, what the behaviours within that culture. And we did a show on how to create company culture change, and we've done similar shows on how HR can add company performance, basically increase company performance. So a lot of these things are obviously quite similar, and a lot of them talking about the culture aspect, obviously, of a business. But then I think, well, even with a good culture, you might have teams that aren't necessarily high performing. But I'm just intrigued about, if you were to talk about a culture itself, what is kind of like the ideal culture in order to ensure that you have more high performing teams than lower performing teams? Like, what would be the culture that you'd expect? I think you talked a little bit about psychological safety. Maybe that might be part of it. But how would you describe that culture, and how can HR help create that culture within a business? And I'm throwing that out to all of you because I'm not sure who to direct that one at, but it's just something that I'm quite interested in.
Yeah, I would like, could I jump in? I would like to introduce a nuance here, because we know about the science, that behavioral economics in this case, that the culture affects the way people behave, right? It's not the same working for Coca-Cola that for Pepsi or for Microsoft or for Apple. No, operating in the same sector, the organizational cultures are absolutely different. And as a consequence, people behave differently. What I mean by that is we can have high-performing teams in one company and then put the same team in another company, and they are not high-performing team, right? Because the context matters a lot, right? And trying to build this high-performing culture, I think it's really important to work closely with all the employees and all the organization, in the sense that we need to avoid the ego thing. Ego destroys everything. We have to put under control envy, right? Professional envy. Not necessarily it's always bad, but because when we play envy and compassion is okay, but if you don't have compassion, envy is absolutely destroys everything, like the ego. And then avoid complexes, right? When you are aware of your virtues and your weaknesses and whatever, and you accept that, you are always in the position to help others to achieve the common goal, right? And that's, for me, it's really important to do that work with every person in the organization.
Does anybody else want to jump in on that, on the culture piece? No? Okay.
I'll give you a little more. I think there are also culture and high-performing teams agreed upon behaviors. What's the way we behave here? How do we treat each other? And sometimes it needs actual discussion of specifics when something's not working. And the way we go about, I love Francisco's discussion of envy, not something we talk about every day in business, because we do like a little bit of internal competition from time to time. The idea that we can perform better than others, that can be a real sort of adrenaline shot for a lot of people.
I agree.
But how do you exhibit that? Which things are okay and which are not okay? And the culture is something that happens over time. None of this is static. You can't just legislate it. It's a question of how people live and actually express themselves. And then, this is not exactly conflict, Leon, but then what happens if somebody doesn't like what somebody else does? And given all the other things we've talked about, is it safe enough to raise that? Can you draw that back to what our shared values are and therefore why we should shift in a particular direction? So I think it's a moving target.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was involved in a cultural change project where I joined a small organisation, and it hadn't really changed in 20 years. It had quite a static, CEO. It was quite, kind of behind the times in some ways. And when we did the first survey, the results were shocking. There was, I think, 17% trust in leadership. 26% of people liked the culture there. It was very, very low. And it was a small organisation, so we were able to turn the ship very fast, as you can with small organisations. And 18 months later, we were entering awards for investors in people. We'd got gold, and we had 98% satisfaction with the culture. We turned it around that fast.
Amazing.
It was a great project to be involved in, and a lot of different factors impacted on that. But the thing that stuck with me, and the reason why my business is led by values, is that the values that we put in were really integral in shaping that culture. Because culture is made of so many things, isn't it? It's operations, infrastructure, governance. It's all kinds of different things. But those values, if you can get those right, and again, they're not a static thing. They can move and change. But if you can kind of enable people to understand those values in their own context and lead with those values themselves, you've got everybody in the organisation shaping the culture then, rather than just, here's a culture code, everybody must, adhere to that. So for me, that was a really fascinating way of creating a high performance organisation, not just a team, through embedding those values. And I mentioned it to you guys before, but it almost went the other way, where it's almost cult leadership. The values were so embedded, we had to do a bit of a kind of, okay, we need to maybe moderate this a little bit, because everybody's getting towards more of a cult than an organisation, because they love the values that much, which is the other end of the spectrum. So that's really fascinating, I think, when you talk about high performance and how you kind of create that framework for it to thrive.
I think also there's so many businesses that have these values, these words written, integrity or professionalism or something, and they're not often if you ask people, and I've quite often been to companies and said, okay, well, what's it like to work here, and what are your values, what are the company values? And I stopped asking, because people were like, I think one might be integrity, one might be teamwork. I think it's teamwork. Is it teamwork? Do we know? And they don't know, because it's and you can tell that the culture there is just not that strong, or whatever the values sort of part of it is not really considered that strong. And I think for us as a business, I mean, we've gone through a real thought process about it, because I launched the business, just kind of because, well, to be honest with you, because I wanted to do something good for the HR profession. It's my skill set and everything else. But I wasn't really sure about what exactly that's going to look like. And then when I started obviously hiring people at the beginning of this year, it was like, okay, well, I need to give them an idea, just the essence of what it is that drives me and why I'm passionate about HR and why I'm passionate about recruitment. And we went through this whole thing. We've gone through this whole thing about improving the experience, because one of the things that really motivated me was that a lot of recruitment companies got a really bad rap, and they got a bad rap because they weren't really looking at things like the candidate experience or what the client experience would look like, and what can you do to make that experience better. And so I thought, well, that's kind of my angle. So it's, if for us, when I'm talking to people in the team, and they're sort of learning off me about my values, about doing things properly, doing things ethically, doing things with detail, and making sure that experience for everybody is strong, so everybody gets a reply, all the things that other agencies might not necessarily do. So I think it's really interesting in terms of, if you're doing that with a larger organization, how you get that, the values in. I think it's great that you did that with such a size of organization, because it must be difficult when you've got obviously bigger teams and thousands of people employed. I wanted to come on a little bit about, sorry, Lisa.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's the interpretation of them as well, isn't it? Because everybody interprets it differently. To somebody.
Yeah, on top of that, Liam, briefly, we have to operationalize our culture, right? How to make it real, putting values on the wall, and then how to communicate effectively all the values, the reality of our culture. I do it. We do it in code of people. What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? What are the red lines? How to address misbehaving or misbehaviors. Immediately, those things are important to protect our high-performing culture.
Mm. I wanted to ask you, Francisco, about the relationship between the individual and the team, and about sort of compensation levels, because I know this obviously is going to fit in with behavioral economics. So, and I always think about in the recruitment space, and Liz also touched upon this idea of intra-competition. And, I know for me, that's always been a driver is I would never be happy if I wasn't near the top of the board of the thing, which is always everywhere and really open and people can see it, right? And I was like, I need to be near the top, and I would do whatever it took to make sure I was near the top. And I found that sort of, I wouldn't say I was happy about it. It was just kind of like I needed to be there. It was almost like that was the not being there was be something that would drive me. But I'm thinking in terms of compensation levels, because if you're rewarding people, let's say for personal performance, but then not giving them, for example, a team performance bonus or profit share or something like that from our compensation levels, can you still have a high performing team, for example, where all of the compensation and therefore the reward comes from the team aspect, but from the individual, if that makes sense? I'm trying to work out whether you can have individual rewards and still have a really good team.
Yeah, that is the key question, right? How to motivate our teams to perform better and to keep them engaged. If your bonuses are always individual, you are never going to have a high performing team. You have to be aligned, right? But if you set group bonuses or team bonuses, you are putting the scheme to get all the people in the team aligned to get the bonus, right? Also, we have to know, and that is one of the reasons that we have to measure behaviors. There are people that don't like social competitions, for instance. Don't like social competitions. People that don't like self-competition. They perform worse when they are they have to exceed their expectations, right? We need to know that to balance the team, to balance individual goals and individual bonuses. Obviously, we have to have individual bonuses, but we know, thanks to behavioral economics and other social sciences, that social incentives sometimes are more powerful than individual ones. And then we have to figure out what is the best way or the best fit for our company. In my own experience, changing the compensation scheme is almost impossible. Even when you are proving that, even when you are doing the research, companies are not willing to change the compensation scheme. Then we have a roadblock there. Liz perhaps knows this better than me as an executive coach and whatever, but it's super complicated to touch the compensation schemes, right? Super complicated. Even when it could make the difference for the company.
Yeah, I mean, just today actually, I was talking with they head up quite a large HR consulting company, and in the compensation package that they don't have any personal bonus whatsoever in there. And I thought it's quite strange for a consulting company in particular, but it's all around so they have like a profit share basically scheme. And I'm guessing, although we didn't go into other roles in every role, but I'm guessing that that's shared with some sort of equity in it, and that people probably get the same sort of share regardless of level. Or it might be there might be some sort of sophistication around it. But it was just interesting that they decided not to bother at all with sort of like an individual bonus for doing well themselves. It was all about, well, if we do well as a company and you're part of that company, you will be compensated this, and this is what it kind of looks like. So it was an interesting discussion that had just literally this afternoon about it. It got me thinking about the compensation elements. I don't know, Lisa, Liz, whether you've had sort of like similar things around compensation, or if it's not really something that you've necessarily looked into in terms of with teams.
I would say, Leon, that as a recruiter, this is a very interesting area because people self-select in many ways into the nature of the compensation that the organization provides. And so if you have, I don't know, a heavy hitter salesperson who is used to significant sales commission, they may not be comfortable in an organization that's team-based, where the bonusing is team-based. And to Francisco's point, changing compensation is the hardest thing. However, it's like a legacy system, everybody's used to it and they're kind of bound by it. And it can be really difficult to create new incentives that actually work and don't just create resentment.
So I do a lot of work in this area. So I do job evaluation, benchmarking, competency and behaviour framework design, consultations with reward programs in all different sectors. And I find this topic fascinating. As an ex-salesperson, who used to be in recruitment and other sales roles, and was always individually motivated rather than team motivated. But then going to a charity where actually we had to do compensation which was across the board and everybody got it or nobody got it, because people that work in charities, particularly the one I was in, for instance, are not motivated by individual performance and are really turned off by it. So it has to be really right for the environment, doesn't it? It has to be really right for the strategic goals. And it's very, very difficult to change. And it's when I go in to do a pay project, which I do a fair amount of, it is the most controversial area that you can go in to do. So important to get people involved from day one and get those ideas. What I find amazing is how intrinsically motivated people are by a lot of things other than pay, though. So actually offer somebody 10 grand less, but they can have an extra day a week with their children. Often it's a hard decision there. Offer somebody 10 grand more, but they have to work on their own when they like to be in a team. Again, money's one aspect. Research shows that the effect of money wears off very, very quickly. It's an extrinsic motivator, wears off very, very quickly. Intrinsic motivation is what keeps people there and gets that passion and gets a team to become high performing. And to go back to the initial question you asked, Leon, as well, I was thinking about the Formula One team, who changed the tyres very fast. Obviously, the drivers paid a lot. I doubt the people that are changing the wheel nuts are paid that much. So maybe you can get high performance when there's lots of different compensations.
Yeah,
they might get a bonus based on how quick, as a team, they do, rather than how quickly they put the tyre on or remove the tyre or whatever the part of their role is. But it's interesting, and I can imagine if you've got a legacy business of like 200 years old or across different geographies and all that kind of stuff, to then say, oh, you know what, you should get rid of all your individual bonuses and just create like a profit share. Can you imagine trying to implement that across the business? It would be an absolute nightmare.
Super complicated.
But it's interesting, isn't it, in terms of looking at those, and it'd be good. There must be some case studies of organisations that have gone really far the other. And maybe Lisa's example, obviously, of the charity is a good one about that sort of side of things. One of the things
I'm a failure, and I worked with a law firm, and that was really fascinating because they'd done that. They'd split it into, there was still individual, but there was team as well. But then there was house points that they could get for conversions and referrals and all these other types of things. And it was pretty complex, and it hadn't gone down well with some of the more old school people that wanted that. I bill this much, I want this much of it. But the thing that came through to me was that the younger generations were really interested in things like, how about I have a cleaner once a week? How about someone comes and cleans my car once a week? What about paying for a holiday? All these other things are what's becoming far more popular now.
Interesting. Just target on those points. We quite a lot, and certainly in the recruitment industry, you have these like social events, and they're kind of considered like really key things to kind of bond the team and stuff. So you probably wouldn't get like a team bonus, but you could have like a free bar for an evening and things, and that was your sort of team bonding and things like that. Do you think just based on what you said, Lee, do you think that helps to create a high performing team, whether you have a free bar on the company once a quarter or something, or what's your thoughts on that?
The thing that helps the most is recognizing that people are different and they're motivated very differently. And it's what we cover on most of the courses that I do at some point, is that people are really different. It's why psychometrics are really powerful. You know, people are motivated by very different things. And you've got a unique situation now where you've got multi-generational workforce like we've never seen before. You know, so you've got, boomers, they call us boomers, Gen Zs, Gen Xs, boomers, millennials, all thrown in the same pit together. And what suits one person, a free bar, couldn't think of anything worse now I'm in my 40s, honestly. Maybe once or twice a year, but, it's not going to motivate me that much.
Yeah.
But the younger people who have been locked down in COVID for 2 years and have, joined a company because they want that social interaction and they need to go and meet people, and a free bar sounds amazing. So it's more about bespoking. It's the personalisation rather than standardisation, which is where places are working towards now.
Yeah, there's a good segue here, Liz. Go on, Francisco.
Yeah, Liam, sorry. Because on top of this, I forgot to mention that we actually practice this in Kodo people. We have to, and linked to what Lisa was saying, we have to build a relationship. Human relationships are the more important thing. Don't matter if you are working hybrid, remote, or in the office on site. You have to be intentional building those relationships, and that is based, or should be based, on respect and not judgment, right? Because of this criticism, typical in companies, in large organizations where everybody is critiquing everybody. I think we have to avoid that kind of behavior, right? That toxic culture, and then no judgment, respect for others' ideas, and then being intentional, building human relationships, a bar or whatever, right? I think is the most important thing.
Thank you. One of the things I want to talk about, it's very similar to this in terms we're talking about different generations, but there's also another trend, obviously, in going into hybrid working or remote working, and companies that are wholly remote as well, and how they're doing that. One of my biggest clients, they are completely remote working, and they don't have that. And I always think, well, how do you build that sort of team mentality, and how do you build things around, if you're across geographies and things like that, how do you build that trust and that sort of relationship and psychological safety around that? And Liz, I think something you've talked about the challenges with doing a lot of those sort of trust things, and how you build that relationship, or it's in the sort of modern workplace scenario. So how that must be more of a challenge than when you've got everybody all in together at the same time, to be able to create that sort of team of trust and that team sort of cohesion. How do companies, and how should HR people go about sort of helping with that and fostering that area of trust?
So I'm going to give you a yes and a no in the harder and not harder. A lot of it goes back to what Lisa said about really knowing who you're dealing with and individualizing where you need to. Trust is something that is easily broken, much more easily broken than it is created. And I actually encourage people not to think so much in terms of trust, which is something only the employee can offer back. But leadership and management need to create conditions of safety. So I'm going to vary a little bit, Francisco, from what you said, because I think it's impossible to have no judgment. I think people are having them all the time, and internal critiques are happening all the time. And so the question, going back to the discussion of values and behavior, is how do we convey the things that are necessary to each other? What is the appropriate sharing of information?
Yeah, I agree.
So that people know what is most useful, what's most meaningful, what gets in the way. the ability to communicate clearly, candidly, and kindly all at the same time. Look, if everybody could do that, we would be out of business, frankly. Okay?
Yeah,
I pay my bills because
yeah,
people can't figure out how to communicate with each other
yeah. That's
or
right.
can't get along and decide they don't have to, you know?
Yeah.
We've all seen that. So I think that the underlying principles, as we've already said, knowing what the work is, making sure that there is competence, these are the things that HR can be absolutely insistent about, starting at the beginning when you're hiring somebody, because so many job descriptions are vague or have language that could mean multiple things to multiple people. And really being clear about what the expectations are, and therefore what kind of people are we looking for, and how much of the competencies do they have to have at the beginning. Often you can't get all the things you need in one person, right? I mean, these job descriptions are written as if people could walk on water, pull a rabbit out of a hat, stand on their head, all these
I'm
things.
always amazed. I'm always amazed
There's no
about that.
person, right? There's no person who can do all those things.
Yeah.
So what are the compromises we need to make? And let's be straightforward about it. And therefore say, so here's what we need to do to accomplish the things we want, given the people we've got. That's one. Two, we've talked a lot about how relationships are the most important. So there are two factors that leaders do not account for enough, and HR alone cannot bridge this gap. One is the time and attention of leaders themselves. How many people do you know say, oh, yes, I have a 30-minute one-on-one with my boss every other week? Is that really enough to create developmental relationships? I would question it, particularly in the knowledge economy, where so much of our work is based on collaboration and you are not just sitting at your desk grinding out your own thing. So the time and attention, the focus, the being aware of what's going on with all the individuals on your team, that's a manager or leader's responsibility. And if they're not doing it, that's what HR needs to come and ring the bell about. So that's absolutely crucial. And when you have that, the other place where HR can be desperately helpful, does any individual leader or manager actually make judgments fairly, reasonably, based on data? And not all data is quantitative, and some of it is subjective, but based on data, they're a way to capture observations, etc. And are they skillful, the leader, at conveying to team members anything that needs to change, be different, be better? Telling somebody to do better is worse than irrelevant. It's actually damaging. Telling them how to do the thing that needs to be different or better, demonstrating it properly with the kinds of training techniques that Lisa has been talking about, that can actually accomplish something. But often we do not hold managers to account in this way.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a real point in there as well about the way that organisational structures are really changing and having to adapt to the pace of the modern world and the volatility of the external environment, because that kind of having the leader being the one that knows all the information and makes all the decisions doesn't often work in organisations. One of the main things that I see when I go into lots and lots of different organisations are some really common problems with working practices now. And when we're talking about high-performing teams, there's a whole infrastructure point there about people buried in meetings, people buried with emails, information and systems and processes either not keeping up with modern times or being too complex. There's a whole point there about like the ways of working. And these new concepts like agile or dynamic governance, and having flatter structures, devolved power. So the leader's role becomes less about knowing and telling and shaping, but far more about creating, different circles that can interact with agile, good enough for now principles, and sprints, and all of these kind of more modern practices. And I see that a lot is about the leader's role being more about creating an environment that's conducive to actually working, because so many companies I know just aren't. They're just buried in death by meeting.
That goes back to Francisco's point about ego. Because for generations, leaders have believed that they were the ones who knew, and could direct, and everyone should agree, of course, and fall into line. And it's hard for people to give that up.
Yeah. But one different thing is ego, and other thing is to be proud of, right? And I'm proud of my, work, or the way I approach work, or whatever. But my ego is putting aside, because if not, you can make it work, right? You always are in comparison with others, and then it takes you to a place that is not good. I love what you said, Liz, about the how to communicate that. Judgment is required. Yeah, but I was referring to judgment in the negative sense, right?
Yes.
But it's required. Also, recently I had to approach some negative feedback to a teammate, and how to do that without hurting them is super important. Super important, because we have to put emphasis in the self-awareness thing, right? Self-awareness is not about I do this super bad, or that those are my weaknesses, or no, your virtues too, the good things that you do too. You have to be aware both, right? And then how to work on that. And when you are aware of that, you can communicate. You can show the path, right? If you are a leader, your responsibility is to show the path, and then how to get there, right? And then I love what has been said.
I was thinking as well, like cross-cultural differences as well in how you give feedback. Obviously, I've done a lot of work internationally, and lots of different nationalities, and we have something that Lisa will know about quite a bit in the UK called a shit sandwich. And this is a bit of a phrase that the British quite often don't necessarily say exactly what it is that they mean, but quite often they'll give you something good and then say that could be improved, and then something good again at the end. But I always think,
I don't like it. I don't like it.
I know. Lots of my experience, like if you say that to many Europeans or an Australian or something like that, they're really confused about why. And actually, what you're probably trying to say is that piece of work is rubbish, basically, but you're sort of doing it in such a polite way, and so the people are really unsure. So I suppose that sort of cross culture, going back to that piece around not just about being together, but also understanding that the different people have different ways that you might want to deal with them in terms of how to manage it, and having that, I suppose, empathy to be able to deliver those feedback to help them improve is probably a key point. I was thinking about recruitment, because obviously I'm a recruiter. Francisco, I know that obviously in terms of what you do, and Lisa, I know you do quite a bit in terms of have done recruitment and done quite a bit around sort of the insights and DISC and all that sort of stuff. So how do you I suppose Francisco might be good to talk about Codo People. So from the recruitment perspective, in terms of if you're trying to get somebody in that's going to help a team, how do you go about sort of analysing those behaviours before they get in to make sure that they're going to help the high performing team that's already there? Like what do you do?
Yeah, thank you, Liam, for the question. Actually, we want to help organizations to build more humanistic cultures, more engaged cultures, and then Liz was talking about that. No, we need more data-driven organizations, making decisions based on data, some objective data, at least lean on that kind of information, quantitative or qualitative. Qualitative, it doesn't. It hasn't to mean subjective always, but quantitative and qualitative. We we know as an organization that behaviors are important because of the way the people, act in the organizations. And if you have people issues, you're going to have business issues. And then finally, you are not going to perform the way you need. And finally, you are going to be in trouble financially, right? And then we need to hire and attract people, considering people's behaviors. We have 3 phases: screening, behavioral style, and onboarding. We incorporated the onboarding one during the talent acquisition process because you can find many candidates, ghosting companies once they are hired and they are in the short period now, and ghosting or quitting, and then we need people engaged. And then the onboarding phase inside of the talent acquisition process for us is really important. And during the screening one, we assess your adaptability, behavioral adaptability, your uncertainty management, and your job interest. Job interest is formed by self-competition. It's like a intrinsic motivation and diligence based on the how consistently you make the decisions you make through our assessment, right? You are not picking randomly all the buttons, making decisions randomly, right? And that is super important because you are taking it seriously. Once I have this screening index, and then I save a lot of time, and then we are people with the right behavior. So one person that is scoring above 80, you can be sure that person displays the right behaviors to be successful in any position or organization, because behavioral thing is cross, right? It's cross.
Okay.
And then it's the moment to pick the behavioral style. If you need someone, Lisa was talking about diversity. The behavioral diversity is needed too, right? We can't have a team with everybody being conservative, predictable, and long run oriented, right? It doesn't work, right? When it's some action too, when it's some unpredictability too, right? And we have to pick the behavioral style we need. And once we make decisions with any other information, interviews, checking CVs or technical skills or whatever, we hire the person. And then after 3-4 weeks, we do the last assessment, right? The onboarding one, assessing social behavioral preferences, envy, compassion, selfishness, different things, cooperation, trust, because it's the time the person it is time enough to be involved in the culture, right? And then it's super useful to see the gap between the real behavior and then the behavior we are observing during that process, and how to help the person with the onboarding phase, right? That is basically what we do, because in some sense, Liz was talking about that. Managers tend to judge employees or teammates through the direct observation, and we need objective information to thrive, right? And then we are bringing to the table this kind of thing that is super innovative, is super different, but I think it's worth enough to build better cultures.
Very interesting indeed. There's so much we've discussed. There's so much to this. I mean, trust, psychological safety, getting the right people in with the right behaviors, inclusion we've talked about, the line managers and making sure that their capability is right. It's a real cocktail of things, isn't it, that obviously seems to create and have an impact. It seems very contextual about obviously what that is and what you really need within that organization. Compensation, accountability, so much to it. We could probably go on for about 3 hours, but we are coming up to our hour. So I'm going to try and finish on this last question, which is, I suppose, like the silver bullet question. I always try and get this kind of thing in at the end of each of our shows. So all of those things combined, assuming you've got, let's say, a team in an organization that maybe needs to improve its performance to become a real high-performing team. If there was one thing or the biggest impact thing that you could do to make that happen, what would it be? So we'll try and look for that silver bullet thing, the most important thing. We'll go around in an order. So we'll go as we start the panel. So Lisa, will go with you first, and then we'll go around. We'll finish with Francisco, and then we'll finish with our two lies, one truth as well. So Lisa,
Okay.
what is the silver bullet? How do we get a high performing team? What's the most important thing to focus on?
I think really getting to know individual preferences is really important. Priorities, preferences, and being able to really work with those. So there's things where people are really strong, and there's things that they can do, but that it will drain them. And I think acknowledging those and trying to work to people's strengths and build that team where people are energized and that energy is maintained and not burnt up. So Perry Timms has got a great book about how you view your workforce like a battery, and you never want to get it to empty. You know, you don't. HR often talks about discretionary effort. You know, actually, you want engagement, but you don't want to burn people out. So having a healthy team where people's strengths are utilised and is energised, that would be my takeaway.
You know, one of the questions I was going to ask earlier that we didn't get around to in the show was we just had obviously World Mental Health Day, and not the last show we did, the show before last that we did was Let's Stop Burnout. And it's interesting, obviously Perry's a friend and has been on the show actually twice. He's one of the very few that's been on twice. But how you balance high performing teams with well-being, because sometimes it can mean that they're working, you know, extremely productive because they're working silly hours and doing everything else. So we didn't quite go into that one, but it's very interesting you kind of brought it up there at the end about how to do that without obviously overstepping that sort of line and making sure that you know, people don't burn out doing that. So Liz, would you like to tell us what you consider the most important thing that you can do to create a high performing team?
I think of this not in disagreement at all, but
yeah,
complementary. I'm really a structuralist at heart. And so I think the first thing is to understand the work and to make sure that there's true clarity about the work and what needs to be accomplished. And then to be able to array the people once, as Lisa says, you've understood them, and to get their understanding and acceptance of what the work is, and to make sure you have a good match there so that, as we said before, there is competence, because they can care about it a lot, but if they don't have the skills, it fails anyway. So I'll come at it from the work perspective, and that will give us perhaps a different leg to the stool. And maybe now Francisco can add the third.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I was thinking about what you were saying. For me, is first, like Liz, understanding the work, knowing the goals, what that organization understands as high performing team or whatever. What are the goals, and adding objective data, right? For me, is to assess our teams, to knowing them better, approaching conversations with them to figure out what's going on there, what is happening, what are the hidden, streams there that are avoiding us to achieve the goal. And then we need to assess. We need to know what kind of behaviors are there, and then as a consequence, perhaps we have some people in the wrong position, and this is really common in some organizations. You know, people that are not fitting their responsibilities or positions or whatever. And then if you move them, if you reorganize them a little bit, you know, you can improve the things, right? And that's for me.
Wonderful. There we go. So that could be a whole show, just that last bit, that last question.
Yeah.
I think we could put like a whole hour on. So, but yeah, we're obviously getting over our time. So we'll wrap up with our two lies and one truth. And remember, guys, that I've been really on it the last few shows, so I'm getting really good at this now. I'm going to start a second career as a poker player, I think, because I can work these tails out pretty well. So. If we can go around as we did. So I think we went in the same order, right? So I think, Lisa, you told us your three first. So we'll all guess. So don't tell us the answer. Just remind us what the three were.
So I travelled to South Africa on my own when I was 19 and had a job making didgeridoos. I beat Findus Pancakes, who you hadn't heard of, for a HR award.
Too young.
And I have a degree in fashion design.
Okay, so Liz, which one of those
Is the truth?
is the truth?
I'm going to go with the degree in fashion design.
Degree in fashion design. Francisco?
Yeah, I go for it. Fashion design.
The same. I'm going to go for the making didgeridoos. That's what I think the truth is. So come on, Lisa, which one is it?
It was the making the didgeridoos.
Oh
my gosh.
Told you.
And Findus Pancakes beat me to the HR award.
Oh, did they? Oh. Oh, okay. Oh, that's just like a half truth almost. They're normally the best ones, actually. The ones that really capture me out are normally the ones that are half truths. They're kind of right. This is like a slight technicality, but most of the.
You're a good liar, you know that. There's sure is some truth in a lie.
Yeah. There we go. Lisa's wise words. Liz, remind us of your 3 facts.
Training as a professional pianist.
Yeah.
Running a 300-person call center when I was 23, and doing elaborate dinner parties.
Go on then, Lisa. Which one do you think?
I think that you ran a call center when you were 23.
Call center 23. Francisco?
I'm gonna go for dinner parties.
Okay. So it's funny, before you said this, I was already going with this, by the way. I'm going to go for the concert pianist. That's what I think it is.
Lisa's right.
Well
I was a
done.
child responsible for hundreds of adults.
Oh my gosh.
Well
Amazing.
done.
Oh my god.
That's a huge amount
I
of
did take
responsibility,
piano
isn't it?
lessons, and my teacher wanted me to be a concert pianist, but
Right. I could see like pianist hands. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I could see them out. I was thinking, oh, she's got a few there.
I'm sorry to ruin your streak, Leon.
Yeah, there we go. So Francisco, yours.
Okay.
Go on, your 3 facts.
Yeah, I love having for breakfast chocolate special cake with pineapple juice instead of milk.
So
I know,
unhealthy.
weird.
I'm so worried about that. That's true.
Yeah, I worked as a stripper during my university stage.
Yeah.
And the last one, I'm a big fan of Harry Potter.
Okay, Lisa.
I mean, I just want to believe that you're a stripper. So,
So Lisa's saying Francisco's a stripper. Liz, which one are you going for?
This is strange, but I don't know how you could have proposed the first if it wasn't true.
So you're
Like,
saying
I don't know how you even came up with that. So I'm going with the
No.
pineapple juice.
Can I also say that I'm also going with that because it is a bit bizarre, but if it's true, and I think it is, I really worry that's not very healthy, Francisco. That's not a great way to start your day.
No, that is the truth.
It's a lot of sugar, right? Anyway, go on, which is the truth?
Yeah, the first one. I love
Yeah,
special
wow.
cake. Yeah, and it has a reason because I was doing fitness, bodybuilding during my university stage, and I had to avoid lactose, and then I substituted milk for pineapple juice.
Interesting. That is very unique,
and then it's something addictive, right? It's something addictive.
Yeah, interesting.
I know, I'm weird.
We've learned something about you all. As long as we've learned about how to build a high-performing team. So thank you to the 3 of you for joining us on this show. Thank you for watching at home or wherever you are. And if you're watching the recording or listening, then thank you also for tuning in. We have lots of other shows like this on Hosting HR, all kinds of topics around HR topic, but not always with HR speakers, but people that will help the HR profession. So I hope you enjoyed this show. And if you have, then please do check out some other shows. But otherwise, thank you all.